The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the rolling plains of Montana. Sarah Callahan wiped the sweat from her brow as she finished stacking bales of hay in the barn. The life of a single mother was never easy, but out here, on her isolated farm, she found peace. At least, she used to. Sarah had moved to the remote countryside after leaving the military. Once, she had been a Green Beret sniper, one of the most elite warriors in the world. But after her husband died in combat, she had left that life behind to raise her son, Jake, in a quieter world. The army had taken enough from her. Now, she just wanted to be a mother. But trouble had a way of finding her. The threat arrives: a black truck rumbled down the dirt road leading to her property. Sarah stiffened, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle mounted inside the barn. Outsiders didn't just show up unannounced out here. She watched as the truck came to a stop and 5 men stepped out, rough-looking, tattooed, and armed. Their leader, a grizzled man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, stepped forward. "Evening, ma'am," he drawled. "Name's Ray Carver." "You own this land?" Sarah kept her face unreadable. "I do." "See, that's a problem." Ray spit onto the dirt. "This land used to belong to my cousin. And I'm thinkin' maybe it's time it came back to us." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had bought the land fair and square from the previous owner. "Not gonna happen." Ray grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "Shame. 'Cause me and my boys, we don't take no for an answer." The men behind him chuckled, their hands resting on holstered pistols. Sarah's heart pounded, but her face remained calm. She had dealt with worse threats in war zones. "Leave now," she said coldly. "You don't want this fight." Ray's grin widened. "Oh, lady, I think we do." Then, without another word, he turned and got back into his truck. The others followed, but Sarah knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Setting the trap that night, Sarah sat by the fire, watching her 10-year-old son, Jake, sleep peacefully. She ran a hand through his hair, then got up and locked down the house. The outlaws would be back, and when they came, they wouldn't find an easy target. She moved through the darkness, retrieving a buried case from beneath the old oak tree. Inside lay her sniper rifle, her combat knife, and the tools of a soldier who had once been feared on battlefields around the world. Sarah spent the next few hours setting up defenses, tripwires, caltrops on the road, and hidden firing positions. Then, she waited. The attack at midnight, the outlaws returned. This time, they weren't just here to threaten. Gunshots rang out, shattering the windows of the farmhouse. Sarah pulled Jake into the basement, whispering, "Stay here. No matter what happens, don't come out." Then, she moved like a ghost through the night. Ray and his men moved toward the barn, laughing as they kicked over barrels and smashed tools. Sarah lined up her first shot. Crack! One of the outlaws dropped before he even knew what hit him. The others froze. "What the hell?" one of them shouted. Sarah moved positions, staying silent. In the darkness, she was invisible. Crack! Another outlaw fell. "She's picking us off," Ray shouted. "Spread out." But it wouldn't save them. Sarah took them down one by one, using every skill she had honed in war. When only Ray remained, he stumbled back, panting. "You crazy bitch," he snarled. Sarah stepped out of the shadows, her rifle aimed at his chest. "This was never your land," she said. "Now leave. Before I change my mind." Ray hesitated, then turned and ran. Sarah watched until his truck disappeared into the night. Then, she went to Jake and held him close. Tomorrow, she would reinforce the farm. But tonight, she was just a mother protecting her son. And no one would ever take that away from her. The aftermath: the rising sun cast a golden glow over the farm, but Sarah Callahan wasn't celebrating. She spent the early morning hours dragging the bodies of the outlaws into the back of their truck, covering their tracks, and making sure there was no sign of the deadly encounter. Out here, calling the sheriff meant waiting hours, maybe days, for help. She couldn't risk the law getting involved. Ray Carver was still out there. And he would come back. Sarah knelt beside the shallow grave where she had buried the men's weapons and wiped her hands on her jeans. A sick feeling settled in her stomach. She had wanted a peaceful life for Jake, away from violence, away from death. But war had a way of following her. As she walked back toward the house, she noticed Jake watching her from the porch, his small hands gripping the wooden railing. His eyes, so much like his father's, held a question she didn't want to answer. "Did they come back, Mom?" His voice was small. She knelt beside him. "They did." "Did you stop them?" "Yes." He nodded, slowly. "Are they gonna come again?" Sarah sighed. "I don't know. But if they do, I'll be ready." Jake didn't ask anything else. He just hugged her. A warning from an old friend that afternoon, Sarah drove into town to buy supplies and check for any rumors. As she stepped into the local feed store, heads turned. People in small towns always knew when something was off, and Sarah's presence, especially after a night like last night, didn't go unnoticed. An old man sitting by the counter raised an eyebrow. "Sarah," he grunted. "Heard some folks were snooping round your land." She stiffened. "Who's been talking?" The man, Sheriff Tom Wheeler, sighed. He had been in law enforcement for 30 years and had the weary look of someone who had seen too much. "Fella named Ray Carver came through last week. Word is, he's workin' for some bigger fish, fella named Dean Holt." Sarah's blood ran cold. Dean Holt. A major player in Montana's criminal underworld. Drug running, weapon smuggling, extortion, Holt had his hands in everything. She had thought Ray was just some low-level thug trying to reclaim family land. But if Holt was involved, this was bigger than she'd realized. "Sarah," Wheeler said, lowering his voice, "I know your past. I don't know what happened last night, and I don't want to know. But if Holt thinks you're standing in his way, he won't stop. He'll come harder next time." Sarah clenched her fists. "Then I'll be ready." Wheeler sighed. "Damn stubborn soldier." He handed her a piece of paper. "An address. If you're serious about fighting back, you might want to pay a visit to someone who's been itching for a reason to take down Holt. Name's Logan Kane. Ex-Special Forces. Like you." Sarah took the paper. Looks like she wouldn't be fighting this war alone. The storm builds that night. Sarah sat on the porch, her rifle across her lap. She stared into the darkness, knowing that somewhere out there, Ray Carver and his new employer were plotting. The Callahan farm wasn't just hers anymore. It was a battlefield. And if they thought she was an easy target, they were about to learn, a Green Beret never truly retires. Silent Justice, the final showdown. Sarah Callahan sat on the porch, her sniper rifle resting across her lap. The Montana night was quiet, too quiet. The air felt charged, like the stillness before a storm. She knew what was coming. Jake was safe. She had sent him to stay with Sheriff Wheeler, despite his protests. "You need to be with people," she had told him. "Somewhere safe." But they both knew, she was the safe place. Now, she just had to make sure no one took that away from him. The enemy approaches midnight. Sarah spotted the first movement near the tree line. Then, the distant growl of engines. 2 trucks rolled down the dirt road, headlights off. A third approached from the north. They were smarter this time, surrounding the house. The men spread out, weapons drawn. Ray Carver stepped forward, his sneer illuminated by the moonlight. "Sarah," he called. "I know you're out there." Sarah chambered around and whispered, "Yeah, and I see you too." Beside him, a new figure emerged. Dean Holt. He was older, bulkier, and carried himself with the arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. "Carver told me you were tough," Holt said, voice calm. "But you just killed some of my men. That makes it personal." Sarah didn't answer. Holt turned to his crew. Burn it all down. The men moved forward, gasoline cans in hand. The first shot Sarah exhaled. Her world shrank to the scope of her rifle. She squeezed the trigger. Crack. The first outlaw crumpled before he even knew what hit him. The others froze. What the hell, someone shouted. She fired again. A second man went down. Ray screamed, "Find her." Too late. Sarah was already moving. She switched positions, her military training kicking in. Darkness was her ally. She used her home's defenses. Tripwires sent one thug tumbling into a hidden pit, another tripped caltrops and fell, screaming. Crack. Another outlaw hit the dirt. Panic spread. She's everywhere. Holt snarled. Enough. He pulled out an assault rifle and let loose a spray of bullets at the barn. Sarah felt the rounds whip past, but she stayed low. She was waiting. Watching. Ray and Holt were still standing. The last two standing, Ray, breathing hard, turned toward Holt. "This ain't worth it, man," he panted. "She's killing all of us." Holt grabbed him by the collar. "You brought me into this mess. Now finish it." Ray hesitated. That was all Sarah needed. She stepped out of the shadows, rifle aimed at Holt's head. "It's over." Holt spun, raising his weapon. Crack. He dropped, dead before he hit the ground. Ray stood frozen, hands shaking. Sarah aimed at his chest. "You can run. But if I ever see you again," Ray didn't wait for the rest. He turned and ran into the night. A new dawn. By morning, it was over. Sarah stood at the porch, watching the sun rise over her land. The farm was still standing. Jake ran up the path, Sheriff Wheeler behind him. "Mom." Jake barreled into her, hugging her tight. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. Then he looked up at her. "They won't come back, will they?" Sarah glanced at the bodies, the tire tracks leading away. "No," she said. "Not ever." Sheriff Wheeler crossed his arms. "What now?" Sarah looked at the open fields, the home she had fought for. "We rebuild," she said simply. The Callahan farm belonged to her. And no one was ever taking it away again.